You wake up tired. You spend the day doing things you didn't choose. You go to sleep worried you didn't do enough. And you call that a life. The question nobody asks is where that feeling came from. Because it didn't come from you. It was put there. And the people who put it there needed you to never notice. Let's start with a word. Productivity. It feels ancient. It feels like something carved into human nature, like hunger or sleep. Something you either have or don't. Something that separates the disciplined from the lazy, the successful from the failures. But here's the thing. The word productivity in its modern sense didn't exist before the Industrial Revolution. Not in ancient Greece. Not in medieval Europe. Not anywhere. The Oxford English Dictionary traces its current meaning, output per unit of time, to the early 1800s. Factories needed a way to measure workers. So they invented one. And then they taught the workers to measure themselves. Before that, there was no such thing as a productive person. There were skilled people, wise people, strong people. But nobody looked at a human being and asked how much output they generated per hour. In 1748, Benjamin Franklin wrote a letter that changed everything. In it, he put 3 words together for the first time in recorded English. Time is money. 3 words. And with them, he turned every hour of your life into something that could be wasted. Before Franklin, time wasn't money. Time was just time. You moved through it. You lived inside it. It wasn't a resource to be optimized. It was the water you swam in. After Franklin, every moment you weren't producing something became a loss. Became laziness. Became something to be ashamed of. The factory owners of the 1800s had a problem. For thousands of years, humans had worked in natural rhythms. Farmers worked hard in planting season and slow in winter. Craftsmen worked until the job was done, then stopped. Nobody worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, year-round. That wasn't human. So the factory owners did something ingenious. They didn't force people to work those hours. They convinced them it was virtuous. The Protestant work ethic, already spreading through Europe, became the philosophical engine of industrial capitalism. Hard work wasn't just necessary. It was holy. Idle hands were the devil's workshop. Rest became sin. Leisure became weakness. And the worker who never stopped became the model citizen. It worked. Within 2 generations, working yourself to exhaustion wasn't exploitation. It was character. Here's what makes this interesting. Anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherer societies, groups living the closest thing to pre-industrial human life, find the same result everywhere they look. The Hadza in Tanzania. The Juhoansi in Botswana. The Martu in Australia. Adults in these societies spend roughly 15 to 20 hours per week on survival activities. That's it. The rest of the time they rest, talk, make things, play with children, and sit in the shade doing nothing in particular. Not because they're lazy. Because that's what humans do when no system has been built to extract more from them. For 300,000 years, the baseline human workload was about half a modern part-time job. Then the Industrial Revolution told you that wasn't enough. That you weren't enough. And it built an entire culture to make sure you believed it. The philosopher Bertrand Russell wrote an essay in 1932 called In Praise of Idleness. In it, he argued that the glorification of work was invented by the ruling class to keep everyone else too busy to think. Too exhausted to question. Too depleted to notice who was benefiting from all that output. He wasn't the first to say it. He won't be the last. But nobody listened because by then the belief was already inside the workers. It wasn't a rule anymore. It was an identity. And that's the trap. You can fight a rule. You can argue with a policy. But you can't fight a belief you think is your own. So let's reconstruct what work actually looked like before someone decided your time had a price. You woke up without an alarm. You worked when the task required it and stopped when it didn't. You had no word for Monday. No concept of a weekend because there was no week. You made things with your hands not because someone was paying you but because competence earned respect. Because skill was part of being human. You rested without guilt because rest wasn't the opposite of productivity. It was just part of being alive. Nobody told you that you were falling behind. There was no behind. Now look at what replaced it. You wake up to an alarm someone else set. You commute to a building where someone else decides what your hours are worth. You eat lunch at a time the schedule permits. You feel guilty on vacation. You check emails on weekends. You lie awake running through tomorrow's tasks. And somewhere in the background of all of it runs a quiet voice that says you still haven't done enough. You need to be more disciplined. More optimized. More productive. That voice isn't your conscience. It's a 200-year-old management strategy still running in your head rent-free. The ancient Greeks had a concept called skol. We translate it as leisure, but that's not quite right. Skoll meant the free use of time for its own sake. Not rest as recovery from work. Not vacation as reward for labor. Time that belonged to you with no justification required. They considered it the highest human activity. The condition under which philosophy, art, and wisdom were possible. They weren't lazy. They built the foundations of Western civilization. They just understood something we forgot. That a human being is not a unit of production. That a life measured entirely in output is not a life fully lived. You didn't wake up this morning failing to be productive enough. You woke up inside a system designed to make you feel that way. Designed to keep you reaching, optimizing, improving. Never quite finished. Never quite enough. Your ancestors woke up every morning with nothing to prove. No metric to hit. No benchmark to beat. They didn't spend their lives becoming productive. They were already just alive.